The agreement to create a loss and damage fund salvaged COP27 somewhat. While funding contours and future contributors remain unclear, least developed and vulnerable smaller island nations in need of assistance to tackle climate disasters are its likely beneficiaries. Such funding will largely trickle in via concessional loans ultimately, like before. A glance at the OECD's Climate Finance Trends Report 2022 indicates that of the targeted $100 billion aggregate climate funding, about $83 billion was mobilized from developed nations via global agencies through 2020. Of this, bilateral and multilateral public climate finance from the developed West stood at $68 billion, comprising concessional and non-concessional loans, 71%, grants, 26%, and equity, 2%, while private climate finance and export credit extended via agencies comprised just $15 billion. These total 2020 figures highlight the challenges in mobilizing the colossal climate investments required by the developing world each year. Not only must India continue pushing rich nations to contribute additional monies for past excesses, but also mobilize more private capital finance on its own by co-creating an auxiliary funding mechanism. The global thematic split reflects that of the $83 billion, $49 billion was invested in climate mitigation activities focused mainly on cleaner energy and transport, while about $28 billion was spent globally on climate adaptation, mainly for agriculture, water supply, forestry restoration, coastal fishing and sanitation. This $49 billion in 2020 mitigation investment globally pales in comparison with India's $250 billion renewables installation need by 2030. The UN Secretary-General worryingly underscored that the adaptation finance needs of developing countries will gallop to $340 billion annually by then. Clearly, we have a widening gap to bridge. Experience suggests that depending solely on timely Western public funds, per current or post-2025 quantified agreements, will be unwise in times of geostrategic competition and recessionary fears. Monies from rich countries are unpredictable, yet the allocation thereof by global agencies is predictably done among least developed and developing nations across Asia, 42% of the 2020 total, Africa, 26%, and Latin America, 17%. With India already the fifth largest global economy and moving towards shaping world agendas, we must temper our expectations of such funds on concessional terms. Actual figures in India's kitty will thus continue to be insufficient for our needs. Also, as with our sovereign green bonds, these funds will largely be earmarked for select public sector projects or renewable energy mitigation and low-carbon transport systems planned under India's long-term low-emissions development strategy, LEDS, for climate action. But what about adaptation and mitigation financing for compact businesses, SMEs and local communities? Surely, they need to be taken along too. While fiscal incentives like production-linked incentive, PLI, schemes may work in drawing manufacturing mitigation investments for utility-scale solar or wind, financing for most businesses across India's credit curve requires a different approach that rewards entities seeking to build resilience through a sustainability focus. So, what can be done? As India lays out a G20 agenda, the government should set the direction for augmenting our private climate finance framework, too. Inclusive growth with relentless and resilient development, Sahit Vikas, Satit Viksan, should be our mantra, as the country marches forward in its quest towards net zero emissions powered by a people's movement as much as low-cost climate finance.